South Africa's Prime Minister John Vorster addressing an election rally. Though his party holds a two-thirds majority in Parliament, Mr Vorster's called an election 18 months ahead of schedule to seek an even stronger mandate from the white electorate in the face of increasing dissent at home and mounting criticism abroad over his government's policy of apartheid, or separate racial development. Apartheid's seen by many as a policy of discrimination, at best impractical, at worst oppressive, denying to non-whites the political freedom and economic opportunities enjoyed by whites. That view is shared by most other countries and has caused a growing isolation of South Africa from the rest of the world. To rally his people in face of that isolation is now one of Mr Vorster's chief aims.
Now pledge their support.
Mr Vorster leads the National Party, defenders of the Afrikaner heritage. Descended from the first white settlers in the 17th century, Afrikaners speak their own Dutch-derived language and have fought fiercely to maintain their special identity. There are fewer than 3 million of them, about 60% of the white population, and their sense of vulnerability makes them reluctant to share the power they now possess. The National Party held 123 of the 171 seats in the last Parliament. With the opposition in disarray, it hopes to make sizable gains this time. It's far better organised than any of its opponents and is in fact the only party contesting every seat. When he called the election in September, Mr Vorster said he wanted approval for a new constitutional plan which would give South Africa's Asians and mixed-race coloureds their own assemblies. The country's 18 million blacks were not part of the scheme. The main challenge should come from the Progressive Federal Party. It holds 18 seats in Parliament, 6 of them former members of the old United Party, who quit because they felt their party wasn't opposing the government strongly enough. The PFP are the standard bearers of multiracialism, believing in the same citizenship and political rights for all races. The largely English-speaking PFP worries that South Africa's worsening situation may cost it votes. Party leaders fear Mr Vorster's appeal for unity could attract those who think a divided parliament might weaken the nation's response to international pressure. The PFP argues that its own policies of racial equality can only improve South Africa's foreign relations.
Ladies and gentlemen, this election takes place not only at a time of confusion in the ranks of opposition, but it takes
PFP leader Colin Eglins campaigned against what he sees as the growing power of the Vorster government. Eglin aims to make his party the official opposition, but he faces the dismaying prospect of achieving this only at the expense of the other opposition parties, rather than making any inroads into the National Party's strength.
Unrest, which we've seen taking place in our townships since June of last year.
Most PFP gains seem likely to come from the New Republic Party, the present official opposition. The NRP is actually what's left of the old United Party, after it lost 1/3 of its MPs through defections this year. United Party left-wingers joined Eglin's PFP, and 6 right-wingers also quit to found the South African Party. This disintegration ruined the United Party. Now the New Republic Party is caught between the government and the PFP and risks losing credibility as an effective opposition party. Many voters have found this realignment of parties confusing. We asked some of them who they plan to vote for.
Why will you be voting for the Nationalist Party?
All my trust is in them.
All your trust is in the Nationalist Party?
If there was a better one, I'd vote for them.
How do you feel about the recent bannings? Has this affected your decision at all?
No.
I will vote for the NRP. That's the New Republican Party.
And why will you be voting for the New Republican Party?
Well, because I've always voted in the past for the United Party, and this is, of course, the subsequent party to the United Party, and I still think their principles are right.
Why will you be voting for the Progressive Party?
Oh, got it, because the government needs to be bolstered and get, a move on, get going.
What are the policies of the Progressive Party that particularly appeal to you?
Oh, well, they're less pro-apartheid, aren't they? More realistic towards the future of the country. The nuts just have their eyes in blinkers. They don't realise what's going on.
Do you feel that it could possibly work?
You mean the three-parliament system?
Yes.
No, I'm totally against it.
Why are you against it?
Firstly, everybody's not included in it. And I don't know, it's just not full participation. I think it's just another trick for him to remain what he is.
Rush hour in Johannesburg as trains arrive bringing blacks from the African townships that ring the city. 3/4 of South Africa's 26 million people are black, and none has a right to vote in the coming elections. They're the bulk of the nation's workforce, but they're not its citizens. Instead, they belong to 9 tribal homelands which the government aims to bring to independence. Few Africans actually live in the homelands. Instead, most continue to work in the industrial cities of white South Africa and live in the black townships. All blacks have the right to vote in their homelands, and that's why they don't figure in Mr. Vorster's plan for a new constitution. It's a position Mr. Eglin disagrees with.
It basically entrenches the existing political divisions between the coloureds, the whites and the Indians. It makes no provision whatsoever for the 70% of people who are black. And I think entrenching divisions and excluding people is merely going to aggravate the conflict situation in South Africa. I believe that the changes that the government should make inside South Africa to try to meet or counter world pressure are exactly the same changes they should make inside South Africa to meet the conflict situation between black and white. Essentially, I believe it's got to start with some commitment of the government to get together with black and brown leaders. I think any constitutional formula, any changes which are made, which are seen to be the brainchildren of the white government, are not readily accepted by the blacks. And I would say the starting point is for the government to call some kind of national conference of leaders of all sections of the community. The other one is that the government so far has failed to make good its commitment given 3 years ago that it was going to do everything in its power to get rid of race discrimination. I think white South Africans must have seen that in Southwest Africa, this has been done through the new Administrator General. And in the course of 6 months, the walls of apartheid have come tumbling down. But so-called white identity and Afrikaner identity hasn't been threatened. And I believe in South Africa we could and should do exactly the same thing.
Blacks, too, have been concerned with preserving and indeed asserting their group identity. This was Soweto, Johannesburg's black dormitory suburb, in June this year, exactly 12 months after a wave of unprecedented riots shook South Africa to its foundations. In that and subsequent violence across the country, over 600 people died. Almost all were black, many of them killed as security forces responded to petrol bombs, stonings and looting. This demonstration to mark the anniversary of the Soweto riots was less violent, but still tense, as police dispersed the crowds with tear gas. Black consciousness was also the motto of this man, Steve Biko, who died in police detention on September the 12th. The mystery surrounding his death is still unresolved. At first, the government said he died from a self-imposed hunger strike, but a post-mortem revealed Biko had died from brain injuries. The findings provoked widespread allegations of gross mistreatment of detainees at the hands of the police, especially as Biko was the 20th person to die in police custody in the past 18 months. Biko had been arrested 3 weeks before in connection with rioting and for drafting pamphlets that allegedly advocated violence, though his supporters are adamant that he never condoned any but peaceful action. Soon after Biko's death, Police Minister Jimmy Kruger gave his account of what happened to Biko in his last days.
The district surgeon was called on the 7th of September after he appeared to be unwell. That particular doctor certified that he could find nothing wrong with Biko. On the 8th of September, the police again arranged that he be examined by the district surgeon as well as the chief district surgeon. And because they couldn't diagnose any physical problem, they recommended that he be sent to a prison hospital for intensive examination. A specialist examined him on that same day. The next day, on the 9th of September, he was examined again by a doctor who kept him in the police hospital for observation. On the 11th of September, he was removed from the prison hospital to the Walmer police station, again on the recommendation of the district surgeon, who said that there was no sense in keeping him under observation any longer. On Sunday, he had still not eaten and still appeared to be unwell. After consultation with the district surgeon, it was decided to transfer him to Pretoria, where the district surgeon felt that in the prison hospital here, he would be able to be kept under longer observation. He was taken to Pretoria that same night. On the 12th of September, that's the following day, he was again examined by a district surgeon and medically treated in Pretoria. And that particular night, he was found to be dead in the cell.
The official inquest into Biko's death is now going on alongside the election campaign and is expected to last several weeks. And it's taken on the air of a political trial. There are lawyers representing the Biko family and lawyers representing the police. Although there's no dock with a prisoner in it, one of the central figures is Biko's widow, accompanied by his sister and mother. Police officers admitted in the inquest's opening days that Biko had at times been kept naked in handcuffs and leg irons. They claimed he'd been violent and that during a struggle he'd fallen with such force his head broke a bench. The Biko case has given occasion for more demonstrations in South Africa as his followers mourned a fighter against apartheid. But not all Biko's friends were blacks, and as Mrs. Biko and her family began to prepare their case for the promised inquest, some Europeans also spoke out against the government. One of them was the editor of an East London newspaper, Donald Woods.
Here we've been told that everything was done that could have been done. We've been given a picture, in fact, of 5 or 6 doctors being summoned, one a specialist, in spite of the fact that nothing wrong had been found with the man. One after the other, doctor has to look at him. And solicitous attention is given to this. The minister's own words, and I want you particularly to remember these words. I want you to remember them in about 2 months' time. Not a finger was laid on him. Not a finger was laid on him. The minister said these words in this context when the warder is said to have looked through the said keyhole of the alleged cell and seen Steve lying there, dead, motionless. Not a finger was laid on him, because you've got to be careful. They talk of fingerprints. I would have done the same, says the minister. I wouldn't have touched him. I would have called a doctor.
With demonstrations, press comment and public speculation growing daily, the government reacted suddenly and strongly in October. 2 Johannesburg newspapers, the Daily World and the Weekend World, were closed down, 18 organizations were declared illegal, and several prominent critics of apartheid were arrested or banned, including Donald Woods. All these, according to the government, were a threat to law and order. The 2 newspapers were produced by a white-owned company whose reaction to the ban was to immediately launch 2 new papers, the Daily Post and the Weekend Post. As many of the original staff had been served with banning orders, the company moved personnel in from other publications to get the new papers out to their 1 million strong black readership. The October crackdown provoked a worldwide outcry. In the United Nations, there were calls for a total economic boycott of South Africa. Such plans were vetoed by the major Western powers. But there was no Security Council objection to proposals from black African states for a mandatory arms embargo against Pretoria. It was the first time the world body had treated the internal politics of a member state as a threat to international peace and security.
Our objective is, I hope, well known. We want to see a society in South Africa in which all its inhabitants, irrespective of their race, colour or creed, can freely participate.
In South Africa itself, Prime Minister Vorster reacted to these proceedings with typical Afrikaner determination.
Ladies and gentlemen, that we live in difficult and troublous times. It is so that South Africa at the moment is faced with a mandatory arms boycott. There are those in the world outside who believe that with this mandatory arms boycott, they can bring South Africa to its knees. I tell them tonight they have another guess coming. It is so that for the first time in our history, and they've been working for this for a couple of decades, the militants and the communists and their fellow travelers in the United Nations, they've been working for this arms mandatory embargo for more than a decade. But naturally, ladies and gentlemen, we saw it coming. We knew it would come one day. Therefore, we made timeous provision for just such an occurrence. I'm pleased and thankful that I can say to you tonight that as far as this mandatory arms boycott is concerned, South Africa not only saw it coming, but South Africa made provision to be self-sufficient as far as these armaments are concerned.
South Africa is rich in resources and has been preparing to face economic sanctions for some time. Most South African industry runs on coal, which is available in abundance, and coal is also being used to prepare for a possible oil embargo. Although drilling for oil began recently, South Africa already produces some oil from low-grade coal. Signs advertising Sasol, as it's called, appeared soon after the first plant began production. Sasol could be a giant step towards self-sufficiency for South Africa. Already it's being used as a transport fuel, even for the tankers that deliver it to the petrol stations. Authorities hope that oil from coal will eventually meet half the nation's energy requirements. Work's already started on a second Sasol plant with 10 times the capacity of the first. So an oil embargo might restrict personal driving, but that's about all. The prospect of personal sacrifice doesn't seem to frighten white South Africans. Hardship is part of the Afrikaner tradition, and the spirit of the early Voortrekkers is still alive.
Mr. Vorster in Cape Town.
Foreign Minister Pik Botha explained what Mr. Vorster meant when he told a Cape Town audience that the world could do its damnedest.
Am I simplifying things too much?
No,
is South Africa prepared to go it alone?
The Prime Minister didn't just say that out of the blue. The Prime Minister said that after he indicated how reasonable South Africa was, how South Africa bent over backwards to try and play a constructive role in the finding of solutions in respect of Rhodesia and South West Africa. And he then said that it appeared to him that it doesn't matter what South Africa does, the world is simply going to go against us. It's in that context that the Prime Minister said, well, if that is the case, if nothing South Africa ever is doing is acceptable, or if we get no encouragement for anything we do, then he said, let the world then do its worst. It was in that context.
Such a reaction is typical of the Afrikaner tradition, stubbornly refusing to give way even against overwhelming odds. But resistance to outside pressure is not confined to the Afrikaner. Even the opposition parties have criticised what they call foreign interference in South Africa's internal politics. And as far as the election's concerned, they see the international pressure playing into the hands of the government. They fear that foreign hostility will only serve to increase the determination of whites to preserve their apartheid way of life. We asked Colin Eglin if he thought an arms embargo would indeed have this effect.
Yes, I think in general, white South Africans of all parties tend to resent outside interference and especially outside pressures. They understand people expressing a point of view. They can understand them disassociating themselves from the South African system. But when it comes to using coercive pressures of this kind, I think it tends to rally people around the strong government. So this particular exercise externally, I think, will play into the hands of the government on the 30th of November.
How do you think the voters in South Africa will be influenced by the recent government bannings and clampdown on press, also the Biko incident?
I think the voters, the reaction will be mixed. I think what it has done, it's helped to focus attention on internal issues, while Mr. Vorster's been trying to focus attention on external issues. So in this sense, it's helped the election, and that we're now back to the internal situation, the conflict that's developing. But I just think that, once again, the right-wingers in the society will tend to approve of this, and I see certain members of the Herstichte Nationale Partij, which is the right lunatic fringe, have actually left that party and joined Mr. Vorster as a result of his action. But I think in the main, opposition-minded voters who were tending to be wooed by the Nationalist Party, by their strength and their new slickness, I think have been put off by this. I think in the main, the opposition voters in South Africa, while they are fearful of the future, don't like to see authoritarianism. They are sensitive to the freedom of the press. And so that the inroads which the government hoped it would make into the opposition, I think are going to stop as a result of it.
The Africans who attended this memorial service for Biko won't be voting in the general election, but their actions over the past year and a half may well have influenced the people who will. An even bigger majority for Mr. Vorster might mean stronger resistance to changes in apartheid. Unofficial Soweto community leader Dr. Ntato Matlana, now arrested, summed up the feelings of many blacks at the service.
There is no greater force in this whole world than an idea whose time has arrived. An idea whose time has arrived. And that idea, ladies and gentlemen, is black consciousness, which is going to free the black man from the shackles of white imperialism, white slavery, white oppression. Power!
A passionate speech, but it's a far cry from wish to fulfillment. The result of South Africa's election will be one measure of just how far that is.